It's just a salad and some bread and fruit and stuff. And James is going to talk about civilization, the West and the rest with Niall Ferguson.
Neil, oh my God, he actually wrote that? Oh,
I don't know.
He's the guy
Please,
who
baby,
married.
please.
He married
They put bottom and stack.
Ian Hersiali.
Oh, okay. Well, that's funny because that's what you always say. You say
I say the West is the rest.
Yeah.
So he's actually distinguishing between the two, and what the rest is are little individual traditions, separate traditions, whereas the West is kind of assimilatory in the best possible way, although it by times hasn't been that great. But I'm not the best possible, but the best so far.
Okay, so I'm just going to say that I expected better from Demi Moore, and I don't expect much from Demi Moore.
Me neither.
So please, baby, please. This was unwatchable. Just awful. So now the rest of the thing is James talking about civilization.
Oh, and that's right.
He only watched the first hour and 11 minutes so far.
Listen to it, right? I didn't watch it.
Yeah.
But that's what you meant.
Yeah, whatever.
Paid attention to it.
Yeah.
It put me to sleep. No, I was tired from yesterday and really the evening before, not last evening, but the evening before, because after midnight I'd only got, that would have been Sunday night, I only got like 15 minutes of sleep, and I try not to exaggerate about things, numbers, as well as what we might call facts. And so I keep looking over there at birds and things like that. They're fascinating. Maybe more fascinating than you folks are, huh? Wow, those look like sparrows of some description. We do have sparrows up here. One's going after an old apple from last year. It's chowing down
he likes the old one.
Old dry apple.
That's funny because the tree's loaded.
Yeah, it is loaded. It's kind of bending down. Sorry, folks at home, but they're kind of like flurrying out their feathers. You know, you've seen how birds do it, right? While they're kind of adjusting them or whatever. I think he's actually thinking about hitting the windowsill. I think they all are.
Well, I put a lot of food on the windowsill.
Yeah, there's 3 of them there.
Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry about that. I was dealing with something more interesting in the civilization. So this is now it's 2 discs. I don't think it's, it's a BBC thing. So I think he did write something called, a fairly large tome called Civilization. This would be an attempt at kind of summarize a précis, if not an abstract. So, I was wondering why CBC had him saying, there may be 6 things that were important aspects of Western civilization that gave it advantages over the so-called rest. And number 1 is competition there, and that's not something CBC's like, or BBC, British Broadcasting Company, is like CBC, only more so. So I can't stand CBC. BBC is even worse for me. So politically correct and stuff like that. Anyway, they got Niall Ferguson in there. His name indicates he'd be Irish or maybe Scottish or something like that.
So you say that Neil, eh?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, Neil. Niall. Ordinarily we spell Neil Niel out here in New World country. I don't know what it's like in the old one. Anyway, Angel just kind of stumbled over a mini step there. She's going blind with cataracts. I know what it's like. I didn't get nearly to the stage where she's had cataract surgery. So you guys probably, some of you guys probably think I'm only morally blind or something like that. That's okay. At any rate, Yeah, I don't think it's competition that should be number one in the West. Although, um, yeah, I don't know if I'd even include that in the six most important qualities of the West. Actually, I'd say it would be more like assimilation of various ideas. That would be one of this. I would say the preference to trade goods as opposed to trade blows by comparison with other traditions. That's just by comparison with other traditions. There's a strong tradition in the so-called West for trading blows. And you only have to look at Germany. You only have to look at, well, Russia hardly counts. The Russians have styled themselves as being kind of Eurasian, so on and so forth. As
I would
opposed to
say that the
European.
number one would be that the West tends not to be conservative
Yeah.
culturally.
Well, and that's part of the assimilation. They'll see something and they'll say, oh, okay, give that a try. We might, and what's even more important is we'll adopt and adapt. In other words, mix it with other aspects of other traditions. And a classic example, as I've mentioned before, I think, is the books. So the Chinese, we're told, invented paper, a certain type of paper. Paper comes from papyrus, which is invented by the ancient, very ancient Egyptians. They came up with it well before the Chinese came up with paper, so we're told. And papyrus isn't made out of wood, whereas paper, as we think of it now, is made out of wood. And the Chinese came up with a formula for that. So if you don't have reeds, I think papyrus is made out of reeds, then it's better, I suppose, to use trees. And so, yeah, the Chinese came up with that, but I wouldn't blow that up too much. And then the Chinese, were told, came up with something like printing. Maybe even the printing press. There's a difference. But the Europeans are the ones that took off with that. So paper and printing press. Why did books publishing take off in the West? Well, part of it is the printing, or the print. It's not just printing press, it's print. What sort of print are you using? The Chinese still use a very clumsy writing system. 6,000, 7,000 symbols. In your average newspaper, and up to grade 12 instruction, it's something like 2,000. But still, how are you going to print that? Hey, Joe, you go get symbol number 5,929, and we're going to put it in here. Or even if we're only going with the 2,000 word symbol repertory. Get symbol number 1,066, please. Can you run and get that for me? That's hardly what you get ultimately with typewriters.
Yeah, it might work out better now that there's computers, though.
Yeah, the big trouble is, what sort of keyboard have you got for a computer?
Yeah.
Big trouble. Hey, look at my keyboard. Our culture is way better than yours because I got a 2,000 symbol keyboard here. And I got my go-go gadget arms. Boop, 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 there we go. Yeah. But, like if they use a Latin script for the Chinese, then they can do that. And they do have a variety of different transcriptions, is the term. Transcriptions to use for Chinese. They go with their own, from what I can tell, and it seems pretty clumsy to me, but what the heck. So this is what you get in the West. It's stuff that's. So where did the West get the writing system? Oh, it's not recent. We use the Latin script, which is derived from the Greek script, with changes. The Russians derived from the Greek script, not from the Latin script. And then with a few things thrown in, they actually borrowed from what I can tell, about Coptic for one symbol, the symbol for sh.
One thing that I noticed with that, he was talking about how Western civilization has already fallen. He was talking about the Romans falling.
And he talked about it as though it had fallen from within. But go on.
Yeah, but I don't see Western culture as it is now as coming from Roman culture more than going back from Greek culture and their if you think of Roman culture, well, that's like French, and there was a long period where the British Isles were controlled by French. You know, like the French was the more
Official,
cultured language.
It's almost like the official language.
So
after William the Conqueror, for
aristocracy
maybe a couple hundred years,
whatever.
Yep.
Anyway.
Ruled over England. Yep.
Yeah, but it's been a while since the French have really had any power over
the world.
Yeah, honestly.
And Pauline's half French. Okay,
Yeah.
so don't start thinking, oh, okay, it's half French, and she's pretty objective about things like that. So,
and I think to some extent, French culture did help raise up the cultures of the British Isles to a certain level.
You mean under William the Conqueror or something like that? I'd be skeptical of that because he was actually a Norman. He was actually a Viking. So they just brought French in. They'd conquered France about 150 years before 9/11 AD, and then they'd adopted French.
But if you look at things, the British Isles, the cultures of the British Isles, then, and I guess if you think Britain, whatever, it went beyond what French culture was.
It surpassed it.
It did.
Went beyond.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you think about it, you could just look at American culture and how it catapulted itself. And a lot of people would probably disagree with me, whatever. But look at when women got the vote in France compared to when they did in America, right? Stuff like that.
It's not that much sooner in the United States than England, but France, it was, I gather, after World War II, at the end of World War II, 1945. And most civilized places in the world, it was somewhere around 1920. Now, New Zealand, I think, was in the 19th century, in the 1800s. Here in Alberta, actually, it was before 1920. I'm not sure exactly when it was. But where women got the vote. Alberta's kind of a weird duck of a political entity and social and cultural entity. So, so for example, he does way too much elevating Chinese culture. So he's saying around 1400 Chinese culture was the cat's pajamas and the bee's knees. He doesn't quite use those two terms, but basically he's saying that. And he's extolling the Ming Dynasty. He's talking about the Grand Canal in China and all this sort of stuff, how big the cities were. Well, like they say, and it's probably true, that when Cortez hit Mexico City way back when, in the early 1500s AD, the capital of the Aztec Empire was bigger than anything to be found in Spain. Yeah, who cares? Where are the biggest cities found in the world? I don't think New York's the biggest city in the world anymore, nor is London. You can get huge agglomerations of people in culture that isn't as elevated as others. Like, which would you say is more civilized? Egypt or Denmark or Norway? You know how small Oslo is? You know how big Cairo is? Yeah. So that's he gets lost in these sorts of things. So he's talking about, we've talked before about the various trading. From what I can tell, he thinks it's like a conquering expedition, but it's a trading expedition. It's kind of like, look this up in a dictionary, argosy, that the early Ming rulers, one of them did, sent out westward. And they say they reached in one of the expeditions to maybe, I think maybe south of Zanzibar or something like that, or somewhere around there. Whoopie ding. Niall Ferguson, I've read some of the stuff, and he was extolling the Chinese for that achievement. He actually says that some people give them credit for making it all the way to Australia. Give me some proof. You know, if they did it, I'm not going to be impressed. They could made it down to Australia. Australia is basically due south of China, and all they'd have to do is coast through some peninsulas and some archipelagos, and they'd be in Australia. Now, so far as I know, they never made it there. Is there any cultural sign that they made it to Australia? It's a sign of how incurious the Chinese really were, that they never made it to Australia by going through from Vietnam or the Philippines or stuff like that into Indonesia, through Indonesia, this huge archipelago into Australia. It'd be a simple task for anyone at any sort of ambition or get up and go or something like that. I mean, for Pete's sake, the Polynesians, I think it's the Polynesians, it's some of the South Sea Islanders made it all the way to Madagascar, which is kind of like just off the coast of Africa. So they came from the South Seas and made it all the way there.
And we know that they did.
The Chinese are given credit for. Well, it's their culture. Yeah. For Pete's sake, you don't see any trace, so far as I know, of Chinese culture in Northern Australia, anywhere in Australia. Mm-hmm. Huh? They didn't make it that far. They didn't make it. It's easier to make it to the New World once you in Korea and you got your influence in Japan than it is to make it to the New World from Europe. Look on a freaking map. And the Vikings, with a very low level of culture, made it there 400 years before the Ming Dynasty. We didn't have big fancy ships and all that sort of stuff. And neither did the Polynesians. They didn't really have ships. They just had boats. And they made it all over the place. Way more enterprising, shall we say, than the Chinese when it came to exploring. China is basically a empire and a continental empire. And that's what they tended to stress. So you look at the Ming Dynasty, they pulled the plug on these argosies, I think around 1424, he was saying. About 14th, and he's saying, you know, they were having trouble in Vietnam. No spit. And I might be using rhyming slang. No spit. Because I think it's 1435, they lost Vietnam. They lost in Vietnam. That's right to the south of China. How, you know, he talks about the one argosy taking, it would have been tribute, from the Sultan of Malindi. On the east coast of Africa, I believe that's where it is.
That was great.
And wow, you know what that guy? He saw these big ships, and it's supposed to be the biggest of these Chinese ships were supposed to be 10 times the ships that, I guess, the biggest ship that Columbus came over to, I guess, Hispaniola, 1492. I don't care how big the stuff is. I don't care if it's a boat like with the Polynesians. Do you do the job? So what happened is this Sultan of Malindi would have seen these big ships coming in. Apparently they had something like guns on them and lots of folks, including soldiers. Anyway, he would have said, okay, man, oh man, okay, I'll just give them a bunch of trade goods and stuff like that. We're going to see it as something like a trade mission. If they want to think of it as tribute, i.e. a one-time tax payment to get someone out of someone's hair or so on and so forth, let them think it. But you know, like you've got to, if you're going to be taking over a place, you don't send like one trading expedition or a trading expedition a year or something like that. You got to really be exporting some firepower.
Let her in.
You know, like I don't think Niall Ferguson understands that. He's supposed to be a world class, I gather, a historian. You know, the Chinese were not anywhere near conquering Africa. For one thing, they didn't have quinine. You know, like the Europeans didn't move into the interior of Africa, I gather, until they had something like quinine. Maybe David Livingstone was doing that, but a little bit earlier. But David Livingstone, when he made it into something like the jungles of Africa, I don't think it was maybe that jungle where he died. And I don't think he was a really, really, really old guy at that point in time. Africa, way back when, before quinine, was a non-African's, I'm not going to say white man, but a non-African's grave. And it's malaria, it's other things as well. Yellow fever, so on and so forth. Sleeping sickness. So a white man's grave. The Chinese wouldn't have been able to take over Africa. So what else would have they been able to take over? Well, you know, like India, it had already largely been taken over by Muslims. I think like 150 years before, you got something like the Delhi Sultanate. Muslims. Okay, so Persians, Turks, Afghans, repeated incursions from the Afghans. There might have been some Arabs involved and stuff like that. And then we're told they converted a lot of native South Asians. Yeah, it could be. A lot of them, the men would have got whacked.
But the people in the Americas, at least some of them, have the Mongolian spot, right? So.
Well, they're related, okay? I gather they're related to Oriental folks and stuff like that. So.
And that actually doesn't surprise me. I mean, I don't know. I was reading
about.
Well,
that's an indication of how easy it is to come over from Asia.
Yeah.
You know, the New World. You know, like they're going, whoa, you know, like. It's easy. It would have been easier for the Chinese to make it to the New World, and they, so far as I can gather, they didn't. I think the Polynesians did on the West Coast, and that's where the folks on the West Coast got some
I remember
totems.
I looked it up one time. I was really curious about. I thought it must have either corn went to China before, because corn is thought to have come from here, right? Come from south, but come from the Americas.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I thought, well, either it went to China long before it went anywhere else in the world, or it went from China to the Americas a long, long time ago. Because the corn that they use for, like, you get a stir fry or whatever, and it's just tiny, tiny little corn, right? And so with over hundreds of, probably thousands of years or whatever, the natives of America have been developing corn and making it bigger. It used to be like a little, like a grass, right? And then it's just a tiny little cob. So anyway.
Kind of like baby corn.
Yeah, like how you get in Asian cooking, right? And so then,
I just thought that was immature corn, but go ahead.
Okay.
You know,
well, I guess it's a different kind too.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, but I guess it would be immature. But anyway,
I don't know.
I was looking at that and I thought, okay, there's got to be something to that, right? So I look online and and apparently that other people don't think that that's a thing.
Well, it could be, but I'm.
Because I was thinking, that explains the Mongolian spot. You know, they brought their corn, which would have just been a little grass back then, and went from there, right? And I don't know.
Well, corn is, we tend to think of it as a cultivated crop, and the folks that would have come over would have been hunters and gatherers. They wouldn't have even been, they're
People bring seeds with them when they go.
Do they?
Sure they do. Everyone brings seeds with them.
Do hunters and gatherers do. I don't know. They say they kind of hunters and gatherers. We're kind of like here in Canada, like around Manitoba, we're planting, kind of like planting wild rice and stuff like that. But that's kind of a borderline between hunting and gathering. You know, they're kind of shaping the gathering sort of thing. But I don't know. The one thing they brought over apparently were dogs. And so the dogs would help out presumably with hunting and a variety of other things. Keeping you warm when you're coming through Alaska if you're crossing the Bering Strait. So.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
I don't know.
So apparently that my corn idea, that was nothing. I looked it up. You can look it up too.
Well, you got to be careful when you're checking the internet. You got to be careful when you're checking.
I looked it up, and they said something on the internet like they've only actually used those baby corns in China for a couple hundred years or something.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and so it was a total.
It's just a
it was
matter
not.
of taste.
I was thinking, oh, I'm onto something here, but no, I wasn't.
Well, it works in something like a stir fry, aren't they? Using stir fries is supposed to go fast. So they would have just developed that. You know, like apparently turkeys come from over here in the New World, but it's named after Turkey. And apparently the Turks actually were the ones that made they bred big turkeys, the kinds that we got now.
Yeah, same thing with turkey, you'd think.
So they changed it. I mean, there's a huge big movement. Niall Ferguson is not as politically correct as most folks out there, but there's this huge big movement to try and dismiss. Now Niall Ferguson is not doing that. He's making a distinction between what he calls the West and the rest. But just trying to find out how inferior so-called Western culture is. And so there's this movement to say, China could have taken over the world. And Niall Ferguson's bought it. Lock, stock, and barrel could have taken over the world if they had kept on sending out these argosies from China, and they couldn't have. They wouldn't have been able to conquer Africa. What happened was they would have been coasting through Muslim-controlled areas, past Indonesia, before then by Malaya or Malaysia, whatever you want to call it. And then they would have to go by Burma, which would have been Buddhist, but pretty soon after that, much of the coastline of Burma, I think even at that point in time, would have been controlled by Rohingya people, who would have been enslaving their neighboring Buddhists, and they're Indo-Europeans and they're Muslims. And then you'd go by Bangladesh, present-day Bangladesh, Muslim. You'd go by the two legs of a triangle, inverted, the V of southern India, and what it was controlled much of it by Muslims at that point in time, the Delhi Sultanate. I don't know how much their control extended to southern India. Come up the other side, they go past the Persian Gulf, and they go past, do I have to say, the Arabian Peninsula, who controlled that, and then they'd come down the east coast of Africa, part of it, not all of it, and again they would have been depending on local pilots, people who would be plying their trade along these. It'd be mainly Muslims. You know, there was one guy who was saying recently, he came from India, and he was so proud. He said when the Portuguese made it around the coast of Africa, from about, I think he was saying Madagascar into India, they were depending on local